The first time I realized my parents had become targets of cruel laughter, it was not even about me. It was about who I loved. I had grown up in a Dallas suburb where cul-de-sacs smelled of gasoline from lawnmowers, where Saturday barbecues filled the air with charcoal smoke, and where everyone knew what kind of car you drove before they knew your name. When I married Aisha, a woman from Houston with a laugh that filled every room and skin the color of warm mahogany, the neighbors who had once waved from their porches suddenly found their voices thick with sarcasm. "How progressive of you, James," they said at block parties, followed by snickers that echoed long after the paper plates were tossed into the trash. But the worst of it was not directed at me. It was directed at my parents. My father, who still wore the same Dallas Cowboys cap he had worn since the 90s, and my mother, who carried herself with quiet dignity, even when arthritis bent her fingers, had to endure the laughter. They were too polite to answer back, too old to fight the petty wars of suburbia. Yet when I saw them standing in our driveway one Sunday morning, clutching the newspaper, while the neighbors across the street mimicked exaggerated bowing and asked, "So when is the family reunion with Beyoncé?" I felt something inside me crack. The cruelty was not loud. It was worse. It was constant. The neighbors laughed when my wife gardened, calling her exotic. They laughed when my parents waved goodbye after Sunday dinners, muttering, "There goes the Brady Bunch with a twist." It was the kind of laughter that drilled holes in your confidence. Laughter meant to rot the roots of belonging. I tried at first to ignore it, to protect Aisha and shield my parents. But you can only bottle fury so long before it finds a way to seep out. I started with small acts. I filled the neighbors' mailboxes with coupons for tanning salons, slipped under the weekly grocery flyers. I rerouted my Wi-Fi name to display messages like, "We hear you laughing." But that was not enough. My parents still flinched when the laughter echoed across the cul-de-sac. That was when the idea of neighbor revenge took hold. Not revenge by humiliation, not revenge by lawsuits or shouting matches in the street, but revenge by transformation. It began with a dog, or rather, the absence of one. The loudest of the neighbors, a man named Rick, claimed his bulldog had gone missing. Posters stapled to telephone poles showed the dog's squashed face under the headline, "Reward." I had nothing to do with the disappearance, but Rick was convinced I did. He stormed to my parents' porch one evening, jabbing his finger and shouting, "I know you people think you're better than us." His laughter had soured into rage. That night, I bought a second-hand dog crate and left it empty in my backyard, covered with a tarp just high enough to be visible from Rick's upstairs window. By morning, he was calling animal control, convinced I was hiding his pet. When they arrived, they found nothing but an empty crate and a note taped inside. "Laughter is a leash." It was petty, I admit, but it shifted the air. For the first time, the neighbors' laughter faltered, replaced by uneasy whispers. My parents did not know what I was doing, and I intended to keep it that way. The problem was that once you start a game of neighbor revenge, it feeds on itself. I began seeing patterns everywhere. Rick's porch light flickered one night, and I told myself it was a signal. Another neighbor's roses wilted, and I imagined sabotage. Soon every laugh sounded like a challenge, every smile a declaration of war. I was no longer just the man defending his parents. I was the man rewriting the rules of the neighborhood. What I did next was not logical. It was emotional, born of sleepless nights and the memory of my mother's trembling hands holding the Sunday newspaper. I started building something in my garage, a contraption of speakers, timers, and old cassette tapes. My plan was simple, to give the neighbors their own medicine. At random hours, from hidden speakers buried under shrubs and planters, I would unleash bursts of canned laughter, sitcom style, echoing across the street like a ghostly studio audience. The first night it happened, around 11 o'clock, the neighbors staggered out in their robes, looking around like spooked raccoons. The laughter rose and fell, never tied to anything visible, until it felt like the entire cul-de-sac was the punchline to a joke only I understood. My parents slept through it, but I sat awake on the porch, watching Rick spin in circles with a flashlight, shouting at shadows. In that moment, I felt something shift deep inside. The laughter that had once wounded me had become my weapon. Yet even as triumph surged, I wondered if I was still myself, or if I had become a reflection of them. I did not realize how fast the neighborhood could unravel, until the canned laughter experiment spiraled out of my control. At first it was subtle, a burst of chuckles when Rick dragged his trash bins to the curb, a sudden applause when the Johnsons parked their minivan crooked, People began to look over their shoulders as if an invisible audience judged their every move. What began as neighbor revenge grew into something bigger. The entire block started to question reality. Soon, I noticed blinds snapping shut at odd hours. The Smith family across the way stopped barbecuing in their front yard, afraid that their burnt hot dogs might trigger another round of mysterious laughter. Even kids on bicycles began circling slower, waiting to hear the ghostly guffaws. And Rick, poor Rick, grew obsessed. He stalked the cul-de-sac with a notepad, scribbling times and places of each sound as if charting a military campaign. His wife, Denise, whispered loudly on her porch phone calls. "He's losing it, Cheryl. I swear he thinks the CIA planted microphones." That was when the conspiracies started bubbling. The neighbors began accusing one another. Someone suggested the laughter was a government experiment, a psychological trial to see how ordinary Americans reacted under stress. Another claimed it was Hollywood, filming a new kind of reality show without telling anyone. Late one night, I heard Rick shouting across the street that China was behind it, beaming sitcom signals directly into his gutters. The longer it went on, the more surreal it became. I had set timers so the speakers would trigger unpredictably. One Saturday afternoon, while my parents were inside watching a Dallas Cowboys rerun, the cul-de-sac erupted in laughter so thunderous it sent birds scattering from the trees. Rick dropped his lawnmower mid-strip and screamed into the sky, "Show yourself, you cowards!" The mower kept rolling until it crashed into his truck. That scene, more than anything, convinced me I had built a stage where the neighborhood itself was the comedy. But I did not stop there. The laughter had been step one. Step two required a new kind of theater. I began mailing anonymous letters to different households, typed on an old typewriter I bought at a pawn shop off Highway 80. The letters claimed to be from the audience, a secret group evaluating the neighbor's behavior for moral worthiness. "We are watching," one note said. "Laughter is earned." Another read, "Points will be deducted for cruelty." I sealed them with red wax, though I had to improvise by melting down a pack of cherry-scented candles from Walmart. When those letters landed, the block lost its collective mind. The Carsons accused the Millers of writing them. The Millers swore it was the Smiths. Hoe meetings turned into interrogation chambers, voices raised, fingers jabbed, and everyone looking for someone to blame. My parents, blissfully unaware, stayed home knitting and watching Wheel of Fortune, while I listened to the chaos through cracked blinds and felt both guilty and vindicated. I began adding props. One night, I placed a mannequin on Rick's lawn chair, dressed in overalls and a plastic Halloween mask with a speaker hidden beneath it. At midnight, the laughter burst forth, and Rick charged outside in his underwear with a baseball bat. He swung until the mannequin's head flew into the street, only to find the hollow plastic skull staring back. Denise screamed from the porch, neighbors flicked on their lights, and soon the block was swarming like hornets. I sat in my garage, sipping a Bud Light, watching the entire performance through a small hole in the curtain. By this point, the revenge was not just for my parents anymore. It had grown into something mythic, a story no one could contain. I overheard kids at the school bus stop whispering about the audience, as if it were a ghost story. A teenage boy swore his Xbox turned on by itself at 3 a.m, blasting canned applause. A girl claimed she saw shadows moving across her walls, clapping silently. None of it was true, but the fear gave it life. Meanwhile, Rick turned his obsession into full paranoia. He strung Christmas lights across his roof in July, claiming the blinking patterns would disrupt the signals. He wore headphones connected to a police scanner, muttering about frequencies and enemy transmissions. I saw him spray paint "No Laughing Zone" across his garage door, the letters jagged and uneven. This should have been enough. I should have stopped when the neighbors' cruel laughter died out, smothered by the echo of their own unraveling. But the truth is, revenge can be addictive. Once you see your enemies lose their footing, it tempts you to push harder. And so, I planned the grand crescendo. I hacked together an old projector, the kind teachers rolled out in classrooms, and rigged it to display on the side of Rick's house after midnight. I created a grainy black and white film reel by splicing together sitcom bloopers, news clips, and old commercials, layering a laugh track underneath. The result looked like a surveillance film from another world. One night, at 2 a.m., Rick stumbled outside in his robe to see his own house lit up, with images of people tripping, falling, and laughing. His screams carried all the way down the block. It was theatrical. It was absurd. It was effective. The neighbors stopped laughing at my parents. They stopped laughing at Aisha. They stopped laughing at anything at all. Fear had replaced cruelty, yet the irony was not lost on me. I had become the ghost in the machine, the phantom puppeteer of suburbia. My parents noticed the quiet. My mother smiled one morning and said, "They seem nicer these days, don't they?" My father just nodded, pouring his coffee. They never asked why. They never questioned the sudden change, and I never told them. Still, I could not shake the feeling that the game had outgrown me. Rumors spread beyond the cul-de-sac. A post appeared on a local Dallas Reddit thread. Anyone else in the suburbs hearing random laughter at night? Is this some government experiment? Others chimed in with stories of phantom audiences, invisible judges, secret neighbors watching from behind curtains. It became folklore, a digital campfire tale. One afternoon, Aisha found me in the garage surrounded by wires, tapes, and broken speakers. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "James, what are you doing?" I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to confess that I had turned our block into a circus, to avenge the pain they caused her and my parents. But instead I muttered, "Just fixing old junk." Her eyes searched mine, and for a moment I thought she knew. What haunted me most was the laughter itself. I had designed it, timed it, placed it. But lately I began hearing it when the machines were off. At dawn, when the world was still, I swore I heard a chuckle from the hedge. At midnight, lying in bed, I felt the rumble of an unseen crowd. Sometimes even in my parents' living room, while we ate pot roast, I thought I heard a faint applause under the hum of the refrigerator. That was when I realized the danger. In chasing revenge, I had given laughter a life of its own. The neighbors may have been the first victims, but now I wondered if I had unleashed something I could no longer control. I used to believe the laughter was mine to command, that I was the engineer pulling the levers, but by the time summer bled into August, I was not so sure anymore. Somewhere between the speakers hidden in bushes and the typewritten letters sealed with wax, the laughter had grown independent. It was no longer just neighbor revenge. It was folklore, paranoia, and theater rolled into one, and it was spreading like wildfire. Rick was the first to form a theory that stuck. One evening, as he stood in his driveway wearing camouflage cargo pants and a sweat-stained "Don't Tread on Me" shirt, he declared loudly to anyone who would listen that the laughter was not human. "It's the Pentagon!" he shouted, pointing at the night sky as if fighter jets might materialize at any moment. "They're testing psychological weapons on us." His words found fertile ground. Soon, other neighbors echoed him. Mrs. Johnson whispered about Area 51. The Miller said it was the United Nations, preparing a mind control campaign. Even Denise, who once mocked Rick's paranoia, told the church group that the devil himself was sowing chaos in their block. They began holding secret meetings in garages, half-baked strategy sessions to combat the invisible audience. I watched from my upstairs window as they carried folding chairs into Rick's garage, hushed voices rising under the glow of a single dangling bulb. They brought maps of the cul-de-sac, radios, even a pair of binoculars. From my vantage point, I could almost believe they were planning a military operation. I had not intended for it to go this far, but there was a grim satisfaction in watching their laughter, the weapon they used against my family, become their own prison. But then the strangeness deepened. The conspiracies bled out of the cul-de-sac and into the digital world. Posts on local forums described phantom clapping in grocery store aisles, invisible chuckles on school playgrounds. People shared grainy phone videos of empty backyards erupting with laughter, though half of them were hoaxes stitched together for views. Still, the idea spread. Dallas suburbs were haunted by an audience that never stopped watching. One Saturday, Rick erected a makeshift antenna on his roof. It was cobbled together from old satellite dishes, aluminum foil, and a broomstick, swaying like a drunk scarecrow. He told the neighbors it would jam the frequency. When it collapsed in the middle of the night and skewered his wife's SUV, he blamed Chinese hackers. Another neighbor, Mr. Carson, spray-painted biblical verses on his garage door. "Every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account." He claimed the laughter was the voice of God, punishing them for sin. I should have laughed. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt the ground tilt beneath me, because sometimes late at night when I checked the timers, I discovered the speakers had been off. And yet the laughter still came. One evening I stood in my garage, every device unplugged, and heard the unmistakable sound of clapping ripple across the cul-de-sac. It was faint but real. My skin prickled, and for the first time, I wondered if I had conjured something I could not dismiss with wires and batteries. The climax came on Labor Day weekend. Rick organized what he called the neighborhood resistance. Flyers printed on neon paper appeared in mailboxes, declaring a community-wide blackout to starve the audience. No TVs, no radios, no electronics after sundown, the flyer read. We must starve them of energy. When night fell, every porch light went dark, every curtain shut, and the cul-de-sac held its breath in silence. I stayed awake in my living room with Aisha, who was grading her students' essays at the coffee table. My parents dozed in recliners, the muted television casting shadows on their faces. I promised myself I would not interfere. I had already won. But just past midnight, from somewhere deep in the block, a single burst of laughter erupted. Low, guttural, and unlike anything I had ever programmed. It spread from house to house, a rolling tide of mirth that swelled until the entire cul-de-sac shook with it. The neighbors poured outside in panic, flashlights waving. Some dropped to their knees and prayed. Others shouted into the darkness, swearing vengeance on unseen forces. Rick stood on his lawn with a shotgun raised to the sky, bellowing, "We will not be your puppets!" And then silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ache. The next morning, the neighborhood looked like a battlefield. Lawns were littered with beer cans, folding chairs, and half-burned candles. Neighbors avoided one another's eyes, moving quickly from car to front door as though ashamed. I thought maybe finally the spell had broken. But that night, Denise knocked on my parents' door. She clutched a casserole dish wrapped in foil, her hands trembling. "I just wanted to say," she stammered, "that we might have misjudged your family. The situation has opened our eyes." Her smile was thin, fragile. Behind her, I saw Rick pacing in their driveway, muttering to himself. It was the first time in months that anyone had shown my parents kindness. My mother thanked her politely, though I could see confusion in her eyes. My father set the casserole on the counter and said nothing. Aisha looked at me, suspicion flickering. She had begun to sense the hidden architecture of what was happening. And then the strangest twist of all, people began seeking out the laughter, as if craving it. Teenagers sneaked into the cul-de-sac at night, daring each other to hear the phantom audience. Strangers drove through slowly, windows rolled down, hoping to catch a chuckle. A podcaster from Austin parked outside for 3 nights straight, claiming he was recording evidence of sonic hauntings. My parents' street had become folklore, a destination for believers in the absurd. Rick escalated further. He painted his windows black, wore sunglasses at night, and ranted that the laughter was part of an interracial breeding program designed by shadow elites. "They want us to laugh ourselves into extinction," he shouted at passing cars. His words twisted my stomach. He had mocked my marriage with cruel laughter, and now his paranoia linked the sound to the very thing he once ridiculed. It was poetic in a grotesque way. The neighborhood, once smug with barbecue smoke and gossip, now reeked of unease. Every act of normal life, mowing, chatting, watering lawns, was shadowed by the possibility of an invisible audience. Some prayed, some raged, some retreated indoors permanently. My parents noticed the quiet, but never asked why. My mother said one evening, "It feels like peace at last." But I was not sure if peace was what I had created. Because when I lay in bed at night, even with every machine dismantled, I still heard it, that rolling, relentless laughter. Sometimes it sounded approving, like applause after a performance. Other times, it felt mocking, cruel, the same tone the neighbors once used. And sometimes, just sometimes, it felt like my own laughter echoing back at me. I used to think the laughter was about power. The neighbors had it, and I wanted to take it back. For months, I thought revenge was the only way to balance the scales. But standing in the wreckage of my own invention, I realized I had built a machine I could not switch off. The laughter had started as a tool, a weapon to flip humiliation back onto those who mocked my parents and my wife. But now it had become something untethered, a presence that lived in the silence between footsteps, in the hum of porch lights, in the space where cruelty once thrived. One evening in late September, my father called me to sit with him on the porch. The air was still, the sky painted orange from the sinking sun, cicadas buzzing like static. He held 2 mugs of coffee, handed me one, and stared across the cul-de-sac. The houses looked ordinary again, kids' bikes in driveways, sprinklers ticking across the lawns, but the quiet was heavy, unnatural. Finally, he said, "You know, son, sometimes the best revenge is no revenge at all, just living." His voice was calm, not accusatory, but I felt the words slice deeper than any lecture. He knew more than he let on. Maybe he had pieced together my role, or maybe he just knew me well enough to sense the storm brewing behind my eyes. I wanted to argue, to explain that I had defended them, that I had forced the neighbors to feel what they had inflicted, but instead I sat there, silent, watching the light fade over the rooftops. My father's words replayed in my head long after the coffee grew cold. The following weekend, Rick's house was a spectacle. He had painted his entire front lawn with circles of salt and spray-painted the words "Laugh No More" across his garage. A small group of believers from outside the neighborhood had gathered, chanting prayers, holding signs that read, "End the audience," and "Silence is freedom." It was part carnival, part cult, and the neighbors avoided it with embarrassed glances. But when Rick saw me walking to my parents' door with Aisha, he stopped his chanting and shouted, "This is your doing, James! You brought them here!" His voice cracked with fury, but there was fear underneath it. For the first time since our wedding, he looked smaller than me. His cruel laughter was gone, replaced by desperation. I could have mocked him. I could have stoked the fire. Instead, I simply looked him in the eye and said, "You laughed at us because you thought it made you strong, but it made you weak. We're still here. We're still a family. And you," I gestured toward his crumbling spectacle of salt and slogans, "you're the one being laughed at now." There was no audience that time, no phantom chuckles, no hidden speakers, just silence. He lowered his eyes, and I walked away with Aisha's hand in mine. It felt less like victory, and more like release. That night, I dismantled what remained of my contraptions. The wires, the speakers, the old projector, all of it went into garbage bags. I hauled them to the dump the next morning, watching the machines disappear into a pit of rust and broken appliances. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe without listening for echoes. But the truth is, you cannot erase what has already been unleashed. The laughter lingered, not always external, but internal. I caught myself chuckling at odd moments, while folding laundry, while filling the gas tank, while staring at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. Sometimes it felt like the laughter was reminding me, "You wanted revenge, and you got it." Other times it felt like it was mocking me. "You thought you controlled us, but we controlled you." The neighbors, for their part, eventually moved on. The Johnsons put their house on the market. The Millers retreated into their church community. Rick and Denise stopped attending block parties, their garage forever scarred by spray paint. The laughter had broken something in them, and whether it was my doing or something larger, I could not tell anymore. My parents, though, seemed lighter. They no longer flinched when walking to the car, no longer endured cruel jokes about my marriage. They welcomed Aisha like a daughter, and together we sat on Sunday afternoons eating fried chicken and peach cobbler while the world outside turned quieter. One evening, my mother leaned across the table, touched my hand, and whispered, "You've given us peace." I wanted to believe her, but peace, I learned, is not the same as silence. Revenge had changed me. I had tasted the thrill of control, the satisfaction of watching those who mocked us fall into chaos. Yet in the end, I discovered that true neighbor revenge was not about humiliating them, not about becoming their tormentor. It was about refusing to let their cruelty define our lives. One autumn morning, as leaves turned brittle and the air sharpened, I walked the cul-de-sac with Aisha. The lawns were quiet, the mailboxes ordinary again. We passed Rick, who was hunched over his driveway scrubbing at the salt stains with a wire brush. He did not look up. His shoulders sagged under the weight of months of paranoia, his once booming laughter now reduced to silence. Aisha squeezed my hand and whispered, "Do you feel it? The quiet?" I nodded. It was not perfect. It never would be, but it was ours. Later that day, I sat with my parents in their living room. My father flipped channels between football and news. My mother knitted in her chair. Aisha curled against me on the sofa. For the first time, I felt like the cruel laughter had been buried, not by my machines or my tricks, but by the life we had built in spite of it. And in that moment, I understood. The best neighbor revenge was not making them suffer, not turning their cruelty back on them. It was proving that love endures, that dignity survives, that laughter, whether cruel or ghostly, cannot erase the bonds of family. Even now, sometimes, when the wind howls through the cul-de-sac at night, I swear I hear faint echoes of laughter, but I no longer fear it. I no longer need to answer it, because I know, deep down, that the real joke is on those who believed they could laugh us out of existence. We are still here, stronger than ever, and that is enough.